On tonight's summary of the Israel-Hamas War, day 290, Israel announces the deaths of 2 Israeli hostages in the Gaza Strip, adding that at least one of them was likely killed in an IDF bombing months ago. The IDF launches major operation in Khan Yunis, targeting Hamas's attempt to rebuild itself in the region. The humanitarian zone in western Khan Yunis has been officially narrowed. The death toll in the Gaza Strip continues to rise, with over 39,000 Palestinians who have been killed since the war began. The number includes both militants and civilians. Continued exchange of fire between the IDF and Hezbollah. Barrages of rockets target new areas in Israel, while members of Syrian political party are killed in an IDF retaliation in Lebanon. Israeli Prime Minister arrives in the United States in preparation for his address to Congress. He is due to meet with President Biden and Vice President Harris, while his team attempts to arrange a meeting with former President Donald Trump as well. Hello everyone, I am Alon Burstein, visiting assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and Israel Institute Fellow at the University of California, Irvine, here bringing you the latest highlights from the Israel-Hamas War. It's currently the evening of July 22nd, 2024 in the United States, the morning of July 23rd, 2024 in the Middle East. Starting with the hostage situation, the IDF announced today that 2 Israeli hostages, Alex Danzig and Yegev Buchtel, have been confirmed dead in the Gaza Strip. The 2 were kidnapped alive on October 7th, and their bodies are currently being held by Hamas. The military reported that their deaths were determined due to new intelligence information that has been gathered recently, and that it is very likely that they were killed several months ago. While this is the current IDF's message from the last 24 hours, it's important to note that Hamas already in March put out messages about the deaths of both Danzig and Buchtel. On March 1st, Hamas put out a video stating that 7 Israeli hostages were killed in IDF bombings at the end of February, and on March 9th, Alex Danzig was named as one of those who was killed. In addition to that, on March 23rd, Hamas put out a video stating that Buchtel had died while in captivity, stating that he survived IDF bombings but died as a result of lack of food and medicines due to harsh conditions in the Gaza Strip. In both cases, there was no comment made by the IDF at that time, back in March, nor were the Hamas publications ever cited in the Israeli media. I would speculate possibly due to military censorship on some of the media outlets in Israel. However, this is the first time this is being mentioned in the Israeli media. In the IDF's report today, the military stated that the circumstances of their deaths are still being investigated, however that there is a high probability that at least one of the hostages was killed by an IDF bombing, matching the videos that Hamas put out back in March, stating that Danzig was killed in an IDF bombing, however that Buchtel died as a result of lack of food and medicines. With this, out of the 120 hostages that remain in the Gaza Strip, the IDF has officially declared that 46 of them are dead, and to that I will add, however, that already on June 19th, the Wall Street Journal published a report stating that both U.S. intelligence as well as elements within Israel's negotiating teams estimate that there are only 50 live hostages that remain in captivity. It is unclear at this point if back then, on June 19th, these 2 hostages were part of the 50 that the IDF believed were alive or not. At this point, that is unclear. In other news related to the hostage deal, in the last 24 hours, Israeli news sites published reports stating that the leaders of all security establishments in Israel, including Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, the IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi, the head of the Mossad Dedi Barnea, as well as the head of the Shabak Ronen Bar, sent a unanimous message to Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu that they are all in favor of progressing with a hostage deal, even if this means a complete IDF withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, explicitly stating that a 6-week withdrawal for the first phase of the deal is something that the security establishment can withstand. And it's important to note that at this point, Hamas is not even demanding a complete IDF withdrawal on the first phase of the deal, only that there will be a redeployment leading towards a complete withdrawal. They are saying even if the IDF has to completely withdraw in the first stage of the deal, the security establishment can withstand that. All the heads of the security establishment also said that a 6-week withdrawal is not enough to fear that Hamas will be able to rebuild in any meaningful way, and that at this point they would recommend proceeding with the hostage deal. This comes amidst the fact that the Prime Minister's trip is taking place right now in the United States, and that negotiations are due to start up again in Qatar on Thursday. Remains to be seen how their statements may influence the Israeli negotiating team, who receive their orders from cabinet, but essentially directly from Prime Minister Netanyahu. Moving on to the Gaza Strip, there were rockets and mortars that were fired from the Gaza Strip targeting the areas surrounding the Gaza Strip in Israel in the last 24 hours. Rockets targeted the areas of Sufa, Nir Yitzchak, Nirim, and Ein HaShlosha. In addition, there was an unusual attack that took place in the outskirts of the Gaza Strip in Netiv HaSara. What was most unusual about this is that the attack was done by a Canadian citizen, Adam Qureshi, who flew to Israel and arrived there only the day before. Reportedly, Qureshi arrived at the gates of Netiv HaSara and began shouting in English at the guards on site about the IDF's activity in the Gaza Strip, before pulling out a knife and being shot dead by security squads in the area. Netiv HaSara is one of the areas that was hit very badly on October 7th. Regarding the fighting in the Gaza Strip, in the central parts of the Gaza Strip, there was intensive airstrikes and bombings that were reported in the Nusirat refugee camp in the last 24 hours, continuing the trends from the day before. Reports indicate that the airstrikes continue in the Ein Jalot towers, which again began to be targeted the previous day and continue today. The IDF had called on Palestinian civilians to evacuate the different parts of the refugee camp, and it is possible that these airstrikes are, quote-unquote, paving the way for an IDF operation that will be brewing in the Nusirat refugee camp. Again, that is speculation on my part. All that we know is that the IDF issued evacuation orders to certain areas, and in those areas and in other areas there are very intensive airstrikes. In addition, the Al-Qassam brigades and the Al-Quds brigades both reported intensive fighting in and around the Netzarim corridor, that is the corridor the IDF maintains that divides the Gaza Strip from north to south, as well as in the outskirts of El Bureij refugee camp, all in the central parts of the Gaza Strip. The bulk of the action in the last 24 hours, however, took place in the southern parts of the Strip, when the IDF carried out a major expansion of its activity in the Han Yunis area. The IDF announced 24 hours ago that the humanitarian regions in the El Muasi zones of Han Yunis are being slimmed down, they are being thinned, quote-unquote, due to the accumulation of intelligence indicating that Hamas has developed substantial activity in these humanitarian zones. In addition, in preparation for an IDF operation in that area, the military ordered the evacuation of Palestinian civilians from the eastern parts of Han Yunis, leading to a mass exodus from the area as different Palestinians are making their way westward. However, again, they cannot go to the humanitarian zone that was previously assigned to Han Yunis. They now have to go further into the El Muasi region because the humanitarian zone has been narrowed. Hours after the evacuation orders, a major operation began to take place in the eastern parts of Han Yunis, with dozens of IDF tanks and armored vehicles storming the area, and reportedly over 30 airstrikes and artillery bombardments taking place within the first few hours. The IDF stated that it resumed activity in Han Yunis due to intelligence reports of Hamas's activity there, and the movement's attempts to rebuild its strength in Han Yunis. It is noteworthy that some of the rocket fire that I mentioned moments ago that targeted the areas of Nirim and Ein HaShlosha came specifically from the areas that the IDF ordered the evacuation from prior to the IDF's invasion. This is a pattern that Hamas has been using in the war. When the IDF orders an evacuation of an area, or when the military approaches an area, it quickly launches any rockets that exist in that region so that they won't be exposed and the rockets will not be destroyed, quote-unquote, not to waste them. In addition to that, while the IDF reported thinning its forces in Rafah in the last 24 hours, there was intensive fighting that continued to be reported in the Tel Sultan region, with major gun battles being reported both by the Al-Qassam brigades and by the IDF. Regarding casualties, no IDF soldiers reported killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours, leaving the total number of IDF soldiers killed in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began on 326. 7 IDF soldiers reported injured in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of IDF soldiers injured in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began to 2,147. The Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip reported that 23 Palestinians were killed in the past 24 hours, bringing the total number of Palestinians that have been killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began to over 39,000. That number is now on 39,006, including both civilians and militants. It's also important to note that these numbers were published prior to the IDF launching its operation in Han Yunis, in which, according to some reports, at least 70 more Palestinians have been killed in the last 24 hours, but again, that number of 23 Palestinians is prior to the launching of that operation. In addition to that, a total of 89,818 Palestinians are reported injured in the Gaza Strip since the war began. I remind everyone that different estimates that are published in Israel suggest that some 14,000 Palestinian militants of Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad have either been killed or captured in the Gaza Strip since the war began. Different estimates prior to that stated that 13,000 had been killed, so it is possible 13,000 were killed and 1,000 were captured. Either way, that number is taken out of the 39,000, possibly those are the number of militants and the rest are civilians. Again, that's speculation at this time. I'm just giving the two numbers that are reported. Regarding activity in the West Bank, in the last 24 hours, there was major IDF activity that was reported in the areas of Tulkarem. This is a hotbed of IDF activity and of Palestinian violence since the war began. Both Palestinian sources and the IDF reported major gun battles that were brewing in the area as the IDF moved in to carry out arrests. In addition to that, in Aqabat Jaber, which is the area near Jericho, the IDF and Shabak reported arresting 2 Palestinians who had been putting together a unit intended on carrying out kidnappings in the West Bank. The two, Muhammad Tariq and Amin Katash, assembled weaponry and also reportedly prepared a dug-out pit where they intended to hide the kidnapped Israelis that they were going to kidnap once they assembled their unit and carried out the operations. It was not reported that they were affiliated with any organization, only that they were putting together their own unit. It is possible this is a local unit that was brewing, or maybe we'll find out later that they were associated with one of the Palestinian organizations. Moving on to the northern parts of Israel and southern parts of Lebanon, there were continuous barrages of rockets, missiles, and drones fired by Hezbollah towards the northern parts of Israel in the last 24 hours. Rockets targeted the areas of Pki'in, Chosen, Kisra Samia, Menara, Kiryat Shmona. Other attacks were also reported towards the areas of Kfar Yuval, Beit Hillel, Margaliot. There was a direct hit of rocket in the areas of Ma'alot. In addition, there was an intense barrage that was fired towards the areas of Metula, and at least 8 drones were reportedly intercepted in the Upper Galilee. Hezbollah also claimed responsibility for at least 5 border incidents that usually relates to shooting attacks that the organization carries out in the last 24 hours. One of these was a shooting attack towards an IDF outpost in Hardov. Regarding IDF activity, the IDF reportedly carried out a substantial amount of airstrikes in southern Lebanon, targeting different Hezbollah infrastructure, military structures, and lookout posts. These included attacks in the areas of Ramia, Ita Sha'ab, Yater El Khiyam. There was also artillery fire reported in Beit Leaf and Hula, and several other airstrikes throughout southern Lebanon. Some noteworthy events that occurred in the last 24 hours on this front. Hezbollah fired a barrage of over 10 rockets towards the western Galilee, specifically targeting the town of Tsuriel. This town is noteworthy because it has not been evacuated by Israel as opposed to most of the other towns that are repeatedly targeted by Hezbollah, and the group also later put out a statement explicitly noting that this town was attacked even though it has not been evacuated in order to widen the circle of rocket fire, adding that the attack was a retaliation to the IDF attack that took place in Hanin. Regarding some noteworthy IDF activity, the IDF carried out an airstrike targeting Hezbollah structures in the areas of Sihin, stating that Hezbollah operatives were identified in that structure. Hours later, the National Socialist Party in Syria announced that one of its activists, Ibrahim Ikram al-Musavi, was killed in the IDF attack in Sakhin. Reports also indicated that Musavi may have been active in the military troops of that party. Again, that party is not known to have an active military wing. However, they may have their own militias, and possibly Musavi was an operative in those militias. In addition, the Saudi Al-Hadith also reported that 2 people were killed in the attack in Sihin, and that the other one, i.e. not the Syrian, but the other one, was in fact a Hezbollah operative. Some political news in the last 24 hours. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu arrived in the United States in preparation for his address to the U.S. Congress on Wednesday. Netanyahu was scheduled to meet with U.S. President Biden on Tuesday. However, there are current rumors that the meeting may be postponed due to Biden being diagnosed positive with COVID. In addition, Politico also reported that Netanyahu asked to meet with former President Donald Trump during his trip, and that the teams are currently working on trying to formulate a plan to see if that meeting can take place. In addition, later in the day, it was also reported that Netanyahu has a scheduled meeting in private with Vice President Harris. According to reports, Harris, like Biden, is going to tell Netanyahu that while she supports Israel's right to defend itself, it is time to figure out how the war can come to a conclusion. And relating to this, speaking at a press conference today, U.S. President Biden stated that we have to continue to work in order to bring an end to the war in Gaza, adding that he is continuously working both with Israelis and Palestinians to see how the war can be brought to an end and the hostages be brought home. Again, the biggest news from the last 24 hours is the announcing the deaths of those 2 hostages. However, again, Hamas announced those deaths already back in March. The IDF's major operation that is brewing in Han Yunis, that is likely to go from east to west in Han Yunis, at least according to the maps that the IDF published with regards to Palestinian evacuations, and of course the growing numbers of Palestinian casualties crossing 39,000. As I stated yesterday, in an effort to resume more regular news updates, I am now going to upload more frequent summaries. However, they are going to be shorter and focus more on highlights. If you have any questions or comments, or would like me to elaborate on anything that I stated, please feel free to leave comments in the comment section below. In addition, I'll also ask, if you find these reports informative, please do help me spread the word. Send the link to anyone you think may be interested, any listeners you're a part of. And again, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications if you want to know when summaries come out. Those are my highlights from the last 24 hours. Thanks for watching.